Hello and welcome to the OnStage Colorado Podcast. I'm Alex Miller.
And I'm Tony Tresca, and this week on the podcast, we have a very special guest host joining the show, Ann Penner. Hi, Ann. How's it going?
Hello. Hi, Tony. Hi, Alex. I'm very excited to be here and talk about whatever we end up talking about. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely, yeah. So, Ann, you're well known on Colorado stages as an actor, and but also you're a theater professor at the University of Denver. So we asked you to come on to talk a little bit about theater and education and some of those topics.
Great.
Yeah, and we'll probably talk a little bit about theater in general when we hit our news section. So I'll obviously feel free to jump in as we kind of work through the news and any shows you've seen as well around the state, because we're going to be rounding all that up, plus the news from around the state and this week's top 10 Colorado headliners on the show. Plus, later in the podcast, we've got Alex's interview with Megan Holdeman of Green Theater.
Yeah. She's got this organization that tries to encourage theaters to not throw all their shit away after the end of a show and recycle, because there's so much good stuff. It's just a matter of creating some sort of a marketplace, I guess, or some way to share the fact that you've got, whatever, a bunch of flats or a Queen Anne dress or something.
What is DU's approach to this, Anne? Do you guys reuse props and scenic pieces? Do you make it accessible to the community? What's DU's approach?
Yeah, thanks for asking. Yeah, we do reuse materials for our shows. We actually saw... we produced Jordan Harrison's Kids Simple, which is a super crazy show back in, I think, 2017. And then we ended up this weird piece of furniture, is kind of like a weird circular bookshelf, ended up in a high school production, I think at Overland High School, that my colleague Stephen McDonald told me. Yeah. And just a quick plug, it's not so much about recycling, but my colleague and our students have the DU Tech intern program. They build sets for professional companies all over the Denver metro area, so which is pretty cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, since we last spoke, we were out at a few shows. Tony and I both saw Baskerville at Lone Tree, so that was a lot of fun.
Awesome.
That was directed by Matt Zambrano, and we did a kind of a back and forth review that's up on the website. So it's a very silly show that's, it's been produced a number of times in Colorado, but this was a kind of a, pretty cool production, I would say, with Gareth Sachs as Sherlock Holmes and Cameron Davis as Doc Watson, who kind of was his show.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a really fun adaptation in the sense that it felt more like reading the novel because Dr. Watson is the one telling the story. And you really get that sense of respect between Sherlock and Watson that oftentimes I feel like in more contemporary adaptations, Sherlock is the kind of pompous know-it-all and Watson is more of the bumbling sidekick. That's not the case in this adaptation. Both men are very capable, intelligent people. And then it's the four kind of actors, the two actors and two actresses who play all 40 other characters who really get to have fun making a meal of these like tiny bit roles, and just it was a lot of fun. Matt is he comes from the improv world. He's done quite a bit recently on stage as well as a director, and I think this was a really strong show for him as well as for Lone Tree, which just got back in the game of producing its own full productions, because back in 2019, it actually put on pause producing its own shows in-house, instead opting to do touring stuff. But in 2023, they brought that back, and since then they've done Dreamgirls, The Mousetrap, and a couple of other pieces, Million Dollar Quartet, and now Baskerville, all of which I think have been really strong outings and show why it's worth producing stuff in-house.
Yeah.
Great. And then you saw Grand Horizons, Tony, at Vintage. So this is another Deb Persoff joint with some other folks in it. What did you think of that one?
I thought this one was okay. It had some pretty funny scenes in there, but ultimately I found Grand Horizons, it's a piece about this couple who they have been together for decades. I think it's about 50 years, but then the play starts with Nancy, who is played by Deb Persoff, who you just mentioned, turning to her husband, who is played by Verl Hitt, he's Bill, and she says, "I want a divorce." And that's kind of the inciting incident for the play. That opening scene is very funny, but ultimately I don't know if the play ever has anything else quite as interesting as that initial conversation around divorce. And this that opening scene is this really thoughtful introspection on relationships, the people we let in our life, and how that can sometimes fall apart. The rest of the play becomes a lot more of a slight family comedy. There's all these other family members who get introduced, and they have much less interesting dynamics and lives. And so I felt that I kind of wish we had the playwright who Bess Wool had kind of focused in more on that central premise that actually got you in and hooked in the play, because it kind of falls by the wayside as the play ultimately continues on.
Huh. Yeah, I mean, it always fascinates people when a couple that's been married for, 25, 30 plus years suddenly calls it quits, especially those 50 plus years. It's like, somebody apparently was just like, okay, I've only got a couple of years left. I'm not going to do it anymore. And that's pretty interesting.
That's what the kids say too in one of those early scenes. They come in and they're like, "Can't you just die together? You guys, you already had the chance. We went off to college. You could have gotten divorced then. Why are you doing this now? You're ruining our lives. You're ruining your grandchildren's lives." So they say. And that early scene is very funny, but it ultimately doesn't really continue that conversation throughout, which, I think that's just a script issue rather than a direction or performance issue.
Yeah. I was out yesterday at Firehouse Theater to see Perfect Arrangement. So this was very good. It was a Topher Payne play. And it doesn't say on the program whether it's a premiere. Or, I don't know how old this play is. I imagine it's not very old.
It's not a premiere. It's been done in other marketplaces, but it is a regional premiere.
Okay. So yeah, this is a lavender scare set, period piece that's also, it's kind of like it's almost done almost like a sitcom, like a 60s or 50s sitcom. They even have some breakaway bits where they suddenly start doing ads for soap or something, which was a little confusing to me. And then it gets real serious as this house of cards, because it's two gay couples, two lesbians and two gay guys who have this facade that they've created. They live right next to each other, and they have a closet that connects them, and they're pretending to be married to the opposite sex partners. And two of them work for the State Department, Andrew Uhlenhop plays this. He's kind of like the head inquisitor who's actually rooting out people in the State Department, while he's also one of the ones who would be rooted out. And so they have this house of cards that eventually, of course, falls apart. And but it's very funny, and great performances by Miranda Byers is always great. Matthew Combs, Matt Hinmarch. Kitty Sunderson, this character was played by Johanna Jackwith, who I hadn't seen before, and she was great. And Katie Medved as Norma Baxter. And of course, Andrew Uhlenhop, and then his wife, Kelly Uhlenhop, was also in it. She plays this she's basically the catalyst for all the stuff going wrong. So at one point she gets to slap Andrew. So it's kind of funny to watch. So that was good. And then I went out to Rise Comedy on Saturday night with Jen, and we saw The Matriarchy, which was three female comics followed by a male comic. And the shtick was that the female comics had written him some really cringy jokes about women that he was then supposed to read, and they supplied the audience with tomatoes or fake tomatoes to throw at him. And so that was a pretty interesting premise, and there were a couple of good comedians, but it felt like he didn't get it. His name was Spaghetti Jake, was the comic's name, and he just acted like he didn't get the whole idea, and so it ended a little flat, but it was otherwise a pretty fun show.
Nice.
Maybe you guys should have just thrown the tomatoes harder, helped him get
it. Maybe. Yeah, they were those those pincushion tomatoes. That's what they look like. Yeah, perfect. So, what about you, Ange? Have you seen anything lately that you wanted to talk about?
I saw Downstate at Curious, which I want to say nice things about before. But you mentioned playwright Bess Wool. She has a play off Broadway at the Roundabout called Liberation, which is about the women's liberation movement, and it's getting a lot of good reviews. So, I saw Downstate at Curious, and it was fantastic. The content is challenging because it follows. Four men, right? The men in a home where they all have a history of sexual assault. But the writing, the acting, and the staging were were beautiful, were stunning. I mean, I really felt like all of them kind of guided me through topic and thinking about this thing that I have sort of not hyper educated opinions about, and it just got me thinking about the humanity of these people in new ways. So I found that really moving and satisfying. I'm excited to see the White Chip at Betsy, which opens this week. I'm going to see it next weekend. Yeah, and then I'm actually going to New York, so I'm excited to see a couple things there. The One Man Vanya that Andrew Scott is doing, I'm going to
Mhm.
see. And then there's this new play that I want everyone to know about that I think I'm going to get tickets for. It's called John Proctor is the Villain. Have you heard about this play? Yeah,
I have
but
heard about this with Sadie Sink is
yeah,
and a bunch of other young performers. It's kind of a riff on the Crucible.
it's a total riff on the Crucible, and it's a bunch of high school students, mostly female. It's written by Kimberly Bellflower, and it's already had a bunch of regional um, productions, but it's going to get their Broadway, and it's kind of a deconstruction of the Crucible. So I'm excited.
CU Boulder's theater department actually just did a production of it this
Oh,
spring. One of my classes, I'm also a grad student at CU Boulder, was actually in the set for John Proctor as the villain. So it was.
yeah,
I'm pretty familiar with it and with the play. It's
yeah.
exciting that you're going to get to see it in New York.
Yeah, and so I mean, there's these main characters, but then the playwright encourages you to have other people on stage as students because it takes place in classrooms all the time. Yeah. Oh, cool. So you were actually kind of in it, maybe.
I wasn't in it. I saw
Okay.
it, but
You
I
saw
didn't
it. Yeah.
sit.
Cool.
Yeah, this week I also got out to over in Denver the Coffee Joint, which is Denver's first legalized dispensary for Bulls with the Bards stoned production of Twelfth Night. This is they've done a couple of these. They've done Midsummer, Cymbeline, and this was a really raucous queer adaptation of Twelfth Night. I think this is. I can say this confidently. This is by far the most polished and professional thing that Bulls with the Bard has done to date. It is a really exceptionally adapted, about 90-minute production of Twelfth Night that captures all the essential elements without losing anything. There's lots of really fun doubling. And I think what they do, particularly with the central character of Viola slash Cesario, they make it this queer journey. Cesario, it goes on this gender journey in which they kind of realize that they changed some of the lines. So rather than like Viola at the end of the play saying, I am a woman, Viola or Cesario now gets to say, I was a woman, and kind of they and the rest of the team embrace this really non heteronormative approach for Twelfth Night, which I thought was just really radical, really fun. And it's set in this 70s disco land as well. Malvolio is this drag queen, and so that adds some additional commentary for the torture sequence of that, which they actually cut. I think this is a smart decision by this adaptation. They don't have the torture of Malvolio. Instead, they do this drag lip sync battle in there to kind of empower that character rather than continue to strip this marginalized person of their agency. So all around, I thought it was very funny, very cleverly adapted, and really interestingly blocked within this, what is essentially the back room of a dispensary.
Wow. That sounds great.
Yeah, it was excellent. It's only got one more weekend of performances, so if you want to check it out, you've got to do it before April 14th. I believe that's the last day. That's their industry night, but I would recommend adding this to your calendar if possible.
Great.
How many people can they accommodate in an audience there, Tony, roughly?
It's not a huge audience. I think it was only about 30 to 40 chairs in the back room. It seemed like maybe they could fit a little bit more, but it was pretty tight in there with all the actors that they had as well. And there were quite a few big choreographed disco numbers, so there's not a lot of extra space that they can kind of add chairs in. So and next Saturday is already completely sold out. So if you want to see it, I would probably act sooner rather than later.
Great.
All right. And then did you get out to some jazz? Is that what the Eric Gunnison trio is?
That's right, Alex. It is Jazz Month, and in Denver, they're doing kind of their jazz weekend that just happened. So I went over to Nocturne, which is celebrating its 10th anniversary this year. Scott and Nicole Matson opened it back in 2015. It was formerly a paint studio that they converted into this 2-story jazz club just off Larimer Street. And I had gone and I'd sat in the bar and listened to music. Actually, once with your son, Alex, Andy and I went and we heard some music at Nocturne just sitting at the bar. But this was the first time I had done their 3-course fine dining experience as well that goes along with Nocturne. So you get an appetizer, a main course, and a dessert, and there's 3 options for each. And it was really just simply delicious. My first dish, I got this pork belly that was really just super tender. The second one was this cod and shrimp combo in an aioli sauce, and then for dessert, I got this kind of custard thing that is simply to die for. And since I went with my partner, we both got different things, so we actually got to try 6 of the 9 options, which is how I'd recommend you do it out there. I watched this older couple in front of us order the exact same options for all 3 things, and I was like, not that there's a right or wrong way to do Nocturne, but that feels like the wrong way to do it.
I have a hard rule of never order the same thing. But yeah, my other son, Max, had gone out there with his wife a couple of weeks ago to Nocturne for dinner, and they thought it was great. And they're real epicures. They're always going out to fancy restaurants. And so cool. Well, anything in the news, Toni, that we need to talk about before we jump into our main topic with Anne?
Yeah, so first off, in my neck of the woods up in Boulder County, Lafayette's Arts Hub theater recently got a facelift. They just announced, rather cheekily on April Fool's Day, that this was no joke. Its walls had gone from a rather questionable yellowish color to this really vibrant red that now complements the seats that are in the space. When I saw the photos, I was like, this is night and day. That space, I love the theater. They've been really stepping up in terms of the shows that they've been producing, but that wall color was one of the most ugly things I've ever seen. I'm not sure how that yellow got on the walls, but I'm glad it's gone.
Well, it's a little past April Fool's Day, and I was expecting. I didn't feel like I didn't see a lot this year, but the local theater company did a really fun one where they sent out this thing about how they were having local lab featuring the world's first play written for a canine audience, Off Leash. It was called, and it actually got me. I think it got you for a few seconds, Toni.
Yes,
and and so it was supposed to have dogs come to the play. I was peppering them with questions on Facebook, like, can I bring treats? What if are there any like sensory warnings I need to know for my dog? And will there be water provided? And all those annoying questions that theater patrons will probably ask. So that was fun.
Yeah. They posted that on their social medias, and then they also sent out an email to their newsletter subscribers. And that the email blast is what got me, because it had quotes from Nick Chase and Betty Hart, co-artistic directors. They really got me. I was like reading along, and I was like, this is a crazy addition to add, but it is Boulder. Boulder loves its dogs. Yeah. I'm not going to question it. But then I got to the last line where they're like, April Fools. But then they did say if anybody does write this type of play, they're happy to accept the submission.
Yeah. I'm pretty gullible. I didn't buy it on social media, but when I got the email, I was like, oh, I got the email. This must be legit.
Toni, my dog Macy, who's right next to me here, likes to be by my side at all times. And I was like, oh, finally something I can bring Macy to. And there was one show that during the pandemic that Buntport did where we were sitting in cars and they were performing on the lawn. And after it, I was like smacking my head. I was like, I could have brought my dog to that show. But anyway.
I saw that. It was I loved it.
Yeah, it was
they
great. They were grasshoppers
they
or
were
something.
Grasshoppers.
Yeah.
It was wonderful.
Yep. So, but Creed did a April Fool's thing too, Toni?
That's right. They also posted on April 1st that they had a last-minute addition to its 2025 season, where they're going to be bringing Butler and Branch, your favorite Creed repertory duo, back for Wicked After Oz, which they say is this totally authorized parody, but just don't ask the writers of the show. And it is set 40 years later, and thanks to a rift in the Oz dimension of time and space, Elphaba has come back from the dead to confront her former best friend friend Glinda, who's been hiding undercover in Kansas ever since. So I thought that was April Fool's jokes can tend to be pretty mean spirited. So I thought that both locals and creeds, where they're just kind of leaning into their brand and the theatery aspect of it, it was pretty fun to see.
Yeah. All right. And there was something else from the NEA that you had to update us on.
Yes, that's right. So, courtesy of some new data from the National Endowment for the Arts and the Bureau of Economic Analysis, it shows that arts and culture added $1.2 trillion to the U.S. economy in 2023. Let me just repeat that. $1.2 trillion was added to the U.S. economy by arts and culture. And that's according to new data from the National Endowment for the Arts and the Bureau of Economic Analysis. And that represents roughly 4.2% of the nation's GDP. And the study also found that arts and culture grew at more than twice the rate of the total economy between 2022 and 2023. And in Colorado specifically, the Bureau of Economic Analysis found that we generated 19.7 billion in spending, making the arts responsible for 3.7% of the state's entire economy. And arts and culture jobs generated 10.5 billion in wages for the roughly 120,000 people who are employed in the arts sector here in Colorado. So that's a lot of cheddar.
Who knew?
Wow.
Yeah. So how is it calculated? What is the study defining as an arts industry? I'm assuming that includes a lot of music and things like that as well.
Yeah, it's a great question. And according to reporting by our friend John Moore for the Denver Gazette, in Colorado, the leading arts industry is by far listed as government, which mostly translates into arts education jobs in public schools, as well as jobs at public libraries or cultural agencies. And so that accounts for about 47,000 of the jobs, and just under half of those are counted as arts jobs, followed by broadcasting, publishing, advertising, architectural services, and interior design. Next is a single category combining independent artists, writers, and performers, which they say accounts for roughly about 3,000 jobs in Colorado. So, quite a bit less of the actual people who maybe you think of specifically as like the performers who are on stage and you're seeing in Colorado. And the study also determined that people who are employed full time in the arts make on average about $55,000 a year in 2023. And then I think John does a good job. He also points out that the study can't really calculate for the kind of overwhelming artists who work on stipends or for free, which, if that was calculated into that average, it would be a whole hell of a lot lower.
Yep. All right. Well, still good to know. I'm sure the NEA is probably going to be defunded by the current administration in some way if they can, but at least for now, they're releasing
But
results.
but I think that's why talking about these numbers is
Mhm.
so important, though, because if the current administration is successful in kind of its attack on arts and culture and defunding these things that provide value for the communities, it's not only going to affect the artist, it's going to affect the entire economy, because the arts don't just impact that they don't just stay in the theater or the performance hall themselves. That trickles out to the hotels, that trickles out to the restaurants that surround it, that contributes to the other small businesses that are on that same strip as a theater or a dance group. And so I think by just showing that the arts and culture sector continues to grow at a rate that is much larger than the rest of the economy. It's a much bigger industry here in Colorado than mining or skiing even, which boggles a lot of people's minds, and I think is worth just reiterating as we kind of face these attacks by the current administration. Be like, no, arts and culture, it funds itself and it contributes vastly to the rest of the economy.
Yep. Well, on sort of a related note, let's turn to our
Mhm.
main topic on theater education and talking about people who might want to get into the arts as a profession or in other ways. So, who better to talk about that than you, Anne, professor at DU, and definitely a well-known person on stages and in director's chair around the state.
Yeah, so my first question for you is, how did you get into the theater education space?
Oh. Oh gosh, I have so much to say. I'll try and be concise. I have acted and performed my whole life and moved out here in 2004, already curious about um, the education sphere. Both my parents were professors. And I moved out here. I had been pursuing acting full time in New York. I came out here and I got a job teaching at the Denver Center for the Performing Arts Education Department, then called Denver Center Theater Academy. And I immediately understood the power of teaching theater for theater's sake, but then also using theater games and activities. They call it dramatic learning, and going into Denver Metro schools and using theater activities to teach history or to teach science, things like that. And so that's really maybe the official start of me getting into the theater education side of things.
Cool. So, it's interesting. So there's teaching theater and other related disciplines to students who are going to pursue that, and then there's teaching theater just for people who, they're not necessarily going to get into it, but there's a lot to be said for what those skills can do for all kinds of other types of career paths. So I was wondering if you
Yeah.
could speak to that just a little bit.
Sure, you teed me up because I'm ready to dig into this. So a lot of I teach 18 to 22-year-olds at the Denver Center, and I occasionally teach way back when the Denver Center had the National Theater Conservatory, which was one of the top 5 MFA acting programs in the country. It's really a shame that it's gone. It was phenomenal. And I very occasionally teach adults. Some who identify as actors, some who don't, at the Denver Center for the Performing Arts Education Department. I am all about promoting and advocating for a liberal arts education. And here's why. The point of a liberal arts, which I think is for 80% of 18 to 22-year-olds, it's the thing to do. I do think for some really highly skilled, energized actors, like doing the BFA, doing the conservatory is the right way to go. But liberal arts, the point of liberal arts is to come in contact with all these different ways of knowing. So even if you're a business major, even if you're an engineering major or a philosophy major, if you take an acting class, which is my wheelhouse more than design, etc. You are learning skills that are going to help you in business, are going to help you as an engineer. I actually, Toni saw it, I posted on Facebook this question and I got a ton of brilliant answers. I want to just share with you let me share with you first personally what I see in my classes. And the two things that I think are most important, right? It's easy to say public speaking, but it's this feeling of presence, which the business community calls executive presence. We call stage presence, and they're basically the same thing. It's really like showing up with your authentic self, but like the platonic ideal of your authentic self with like the energy and the confidence and the ability to listen, the ability to lead. That's both stage presence and executive presence. And this idea of diminishing self-consciousness. So we walk around, we're constantly self-conscious to varying degrees. I see students come into an acting class like almost pathologically self-conscious. That I had an experience watching a student stand in front of their classmates, and cry. And not because it wasn't judgment. It was the physical act of standing in front of a group of people is terrifying for so many of us. But when you take an acting class and you're exposed to that and you practice it, that self-consciousness diminishes. And so for public speaking, any leadership, any experience we have, whatever profession you're in, speaking to a large group of people, an acting class is going to help with that. The other stuff that people shared are, again, all these kind of this idea of leading a group of people, flexibility, adaptability, which you have to because theater is so collaborative, time management, and working on a deadline. Oh my God, like the deadline being that it's opening night, right? So that idea of managing time within a rehearsal, starting rehearsal on time, giving people breaks, that idea of working collaboratively with a group of people on a project, and making sure you complete it on time. And just a couple more things. Empathy, the idea of inhabiting other people's point of view, which I think, imagine sitting around a board meeting or an office space and you have a colleague who's saying something that initially makes you hot or angry. If you just have the ability to actually try and see the circumstances from their point, you kind of like play their character, right? So anyway, those are a bunch of things that examples of what a theater education or a class can give you, even if you don't become an actor. Yeah.
And those are they're all very different skill sets, like
Yes.
things from working collaboratively to time management to being a more confident speaker. It's not just one area that it helps you build up the skills. And how do you articulate that to maybe students or parents who maybe are like, I don't want my kid to I don't want them to waste any time on theater. They need to be focused on their core disciplines that are going to help them get a job or whatever. How do you approach that? How do you kind of articulate the value to those folks?
Yeah. Yeah, it's tricky because it's this language we still use is qualitative, and it's very hard to create metrics for it. So,
Mhm.
my quick answer for you, it doesn't exactly answer your question, is it's really easy at University of Denver and many programs to double major, right? So, what I will say to an 18-year-old will say, my parents want me to get a business degree, or I also want to get a business degree, or I'm here for engineering, and I say you can just do both. Um, this is not true in all sort of academic situations, but 18-year-olds put a lot of pressure on themselves, or maybe their parents also put a lot of pressure on them to kind of enter. They're only 18, they're a teenager, to kind of enter with the assumption that they're launching their career at that point. And I want to
Yeah.
say, all these things I just mentioned, these are actually, if you swim inside of these opportunities to practice these leadership skills, to practice communication skills, to practice how to collaborate and synthesize, and yes and, right, improv is built on yes and, right, the way you translate yes and into any kind of group project, or even I would imagine a business meeting, is you hear what your colleague is offering, right, and if you treat that as, okay, let's go with that, if that's a good idea, then how do I add to that, right? How do I synthesize my idea with your idea? So I don't know if I'm really answering your question, but I what I do feel is I'm surrounded by these 18 to 22-year-olds who think that should already be starting their careers, and I want to say, just give it these 4 years, and when your brain has the opportunity on any given week to sit inside your two business classes plus your acting class plus your English lit class, right? Or your drawing class, it's going to make these connections that are going to set you up for more success in whatever, high profile career that you want. I mean, so many business executives, lawyers, doctors, what are other fancy high whatever business people, right? Take
Yeah.
classes at the Denver Center. I mean, some of them wrote into my Facebook, these lawyers and business people, executives, uh, in order to really to learn executive presence, in order to figure out how to use language, how to communicate, how to be better listeners. There's stories. I used to teach with the Denver Business School a lot, and there's this amazing woman who, when I knew her a few years ago, run the executive education program, and she would be coaching these executives who were excellent business people. Like their brains worked brilliantly to do their jobs, but they would show up in the room, and the affect that they expressed, that the impression they gave everyone else in the room, was they were an asshole, they had no power, they were shitty listeners. I'm sorry that I'm swearing, right? That they actually had the skills to do their job, but how they showed up in the room was negative. And so her job was really to teach them basically theater skills of presence, executive presence, active listening, sympathy, empathy, right? Mimicry, resonating, mirroring back what people are giving you. And that all of a sudden actually gave them more power. So it's finding the language to talk about what the business world calls soft skills, which is really these communication skills, rather than just the hard skills of like accounting, finance, marketing, etc.
I'm in the dual MBA MA program at CU
Great.
Boulder,
Yeah.
and we have a whole class on just public speaking, and it is absolutely crazy to watch some of my classmates who I think of as incredibly intelligent, very wicked smart people, but yet as soon as they try to get up in front of a group of people and articulate what's inside their head, all of it goes out the window. So even
Yeah.
in business school, they recognize the value
Yeah.
of fostering those soft skills. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's a really great way to think about it. And it maybe not always will be super apparent initially when you're in that theater class how the
Right.
skills will translate. But when you're in those like different rooms, like I've had people in those classes be like, "How do you get up and talk like in front of people?" And I'm
Right.
like, I did improv for years.
Yes.
I'm like, there's no question that's going to come out
Right.
in the audience that's going to throw me, because I'll just listen to it. And if I don't know the answer, I just say that and then try to move forward. And they're like, whereas they're they
Yeah.
get stuck in their own head. It's
Yes.
very much, it's super stressful, like you said.
Yeah, I love that. The one other thing I want to say is classes, a lot of academic classes, not all of them, really focus on intellectual learning, like cognitive. Like I, the teacher, the instructor, I'm going to stand and I'm going to give you this information packed, intellectually fascinating uh, lecture, for an hour or an hour and a half. And the student is sitting there and they're typing on their computer, right? And they aren't moving their body and they aren't breathing and they aren't actually, all they're doing is they're taking it in cognitively. But so much of learning and processing and human experience happens kinesthetically, viscerally, through breath, through just like trying stuff out, getting on your feet, etc. And and so that is another way of thinking about it. Is I think too much of learning is kind of one way of learning, when actually we can learn skills and even learn cognitive information if we're kind of like on our feet, moving our bodies and working collaboratively. um, I'm sort of fascinated with that. And the other thing I'll say is I have a podcast with my friend Kateri McCrae, who's a psychology professor, and we're turning our podcast into a book, which is really exciting. And
Oh,
we're
cool.
working on it's going to come out next year with Routledge, and we're working on the emotion chapter. And Kateri, as an emotion, she's an affective neuroscientist. And so we're kind of unpacking this idea of emotion, which I'm happy to talk more about. But I think she talks about emotion regulation. And as an actor, I'm all about like, let's feel everything. Like, let's get upset. Like, it's all good. And her point is like, it's not always great to fully express it. Like, imagine being in like a high powered business meeting and you're the CEO and someone just said something that made you really, really angry, right?
Mm.
You need to think about how you need to calibrate. You need to have the skill set to calibrate how to respond to that. And that also is acting training in terms of being a little more malleable and flexible inside feelings, emotions. Yeah.
And have you had former students come back to you, and maybe they're not, they're not in theater, they're doing something like these business, and it said, "Thank you so much," and give you an example of how it helped them?
Yeah, I actually I have some notes here. Yeah. And the other thing I'll say is current students, yes, let me answer that. And also just the fact that like the classes are small enough where everyone knows their name and actually just calls each other by their name is significant. Um, I'm looking at an alum who I'd say that my acting skills brought forward natural leadership ability, strong communication skills, the ability to study and research anything, because all theater people do a ton of their own dramaturgical research, and to learn, and a desire to learn continuously throughout life and any career. Students who come back, they have a sense of belonging, which again is hard to measure with numbers. But if we feel like we belong and are welcomed and included in the conversation, um, whether it's in class or out in a coffee shop or a bar or whatever, a rehearsal space, then I think we're more likely to sort of bring our best selves. They, what else would they say? They had fun. I mean, like learning and careers I feel like we should enjoy the work we do. And I think people feel like, if what you're doing is pleasurable, regardless of what it is, then you're going to do it better and just be a happier human being. Also, I teach a lot of sort of movement and vocal work, and both the body and the voice are incredible communicating tools. And a lot of people don't know how to kind of bring the full force and power and dynamism of their natural voice or their natural body into spaces. So people walk around sort of disembodied, and people walk around using a fraction of what their voice can do. So I think some alums have mentioned that as well.
So we've been talking quite a bit about how the skills that you teach as a theater educator can apply to other realms outside of theater. I'd love to turn, if we could, just quickly to your more theater specific students.
Yeah.
What advice do you offer them to kind of as tips to navigating the current theater industry? If they're coming in, they're a full-time theater student, that's what they want to do. How do you approach that? Do you treat that differently than you do those other students who maybe are they're the double majors they're going to be maybe going into a field in business or law? How do you think about that as a teacher?
Sure. I guess I have two answers. One is when I know when they're a theater major and they're taking the acting work or the directing work seriously, I would say that my critiques are a little more. The way I respond to their work is more specific and I don't want to say more critical. I just have even higher expectations. Like if it's a business major just there to fulfill the common curriculum and but is a good team player, then for me, it's about the stuff I mentioned, like presence and self-consciousness and figuring out how to work with a team. When it's an actor who wants to graduate and work professionally, we're getting into the real nitty-gritty of the voice work, the text work, the movement work, the acting work. In terms of sort of when they graduate, we're a BA, so a BFA conservatory would take responsibility for kind of building a showcase and building a showcase and taking it to like LA and or New York and getting the Boulder does this. I think Tammy Meneghini maybe does this where she takes them to both New York. I don't know where she takes them, but she builds a whole showcase and she takes them to one or two major cities and they're trying to get an agent, right? And begin to
Mhm.
work professionally. We don't take that on, but I try to give them as much professional advice as possible. They it's a lot about networking. It's about auditioning. It's about repetition of getting yourself out there, networking, building professional relationships with local directors, local actors, local theater companies. And so an example, we have professional directors come and direct in our department and they very generously often will audition and cast some of our students. And we have this DU Tech intern relationship with Curious and Local and Betsy, and that then leads to sort of the ability to audition. Yeah, I have a lot to say about that, but it's about sort of getting themselves out there. Also, in the past 5-10 years, it's about having. Now I'm sort of launching into professional. Just I'm fascinated by the pressure on younger actors to have like a social media presence also, and to be really present online, to get noticed, which I find I don't know, makes me sad that they feel like they have to do that. But I think it works. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, it sounds. I mean, you need to be pretty versatile if you're going to be have a career. I mean, you can't just. I mean, you could theoretically hit it big and really, make be survive as just an actor if you're really lucky. But what are some of the things that you might talk about in terms of versatility, like being directors and yeah, doing your own marketing yourself, social media, all those kinds of things.
Yeah. Yeah, you're really lucky if you make a living just acting. So, and this again is kind of the beauty of a BA, which is our students deep dive into at least one thing. Like I'm an actor, I'm a director, I'm a playwright, I'm a scenic designer, but they have to take a little bit of everything. So most of our students are sort of director, actor, playwright, scenic designer, stage management, historian, dramaturg, etc. So I think that versatility, even within theater, allows you to become more employable. I really like that I identify professionally as an actor and a director. That just provides me more opportunities to sort of reach for. Um, we have a lot of students who are technicians and designers, but also actors. And so if they stay in the kind of Denver metro community, they might do a kind of combination of design or tech or stage management plus acting plus directing. Um, I don't. Did I answer your question? I'm not sure I fully answered your question. I kind of dropped into the but I also, I lived in New York for a long time and what I was also a teacher. So I would pursue acting and had some success getting sort of regional theater gigs, but then I also did a fair amount of teaching to make money. So that versatility as a sort of my parents would always encourage me, but but you need this other thing. So that's I was a sort of theater and English major.
Mhm.
It's tricky. I would probably, if one of my kids was an actor, I would be like, "Great, pursue it, and then also have this other thing."
Right.
I think it's really. I mean, I admire the ones who go fully whole hog with acting, but it's financially a little frightening. Yeah.
And I got advice from I went to a liberal arts
Yeah.
school for my undergrad, and advice I got from one of my acting professors there was that the best performers are also knowledgeable in other areas. They have other
Yes.
lived experiences. If you're
Yes.
just all in a theater building all the time, only reading books about acting, you're actually not going to be a very interesting performer because you
Yeah.
have no lived experience or
Yeah.
no knowledge of the outside world,
Yeah.
which is what acting, at least in this professor's opinion, was really
Yeah.
about. It's translating the real life experience. And if you
Yes.
don't have any lived experience, how do you do that?
Right. And it's the beauty, we're a culture obsessed with youth, right? And as a middle-aged lady, I'm like, when exactly will I disappear? But um, it is age helps acting. The more lived experience you have, it also kind of drops you into your presence. It's just the more you sort of get you lose self-consciousness in some ways the older you get, and it actually also sets you up. But I
Yeah.
completely agree for that. Acting is so much about diverse lived experience, research, imagination. Yeah, love that.
Yeah, you could
So,
say the same thing about little kids, that they're
Yeah,
such good actors, because they
yeah,
don't have anything to tell them they're not, and they just
yeah,
jump right in. I
yeah,
love kid stuff.
yeah.
they're so uninhibited. That's what I
Uninhibited,
always
and
used to hear. Yeah.
that's such a big, I mean, again, going back to this idea of decreasing self-consciousness, increasing presence, it's kind of the same thing. Is if you can get rid of the self-consciousness and the tightness and the tension, then that just allows you to play, and it allows you to actually be present in these imaginary circumstances that you're living inside of.
So you mentioned that you are an actor slash director as well, in addition to being a teacher at DU. I saw your work earlier this year, the Moors that you
Oh
did for
yeah.
DU. It
Thank
was
you for coming.
excellent, excellent production. It
Yes.
was my first time seeing that, and your student actors were phenomenal. The Brian Malgrave set that you had for that was beautiful to look at. It just made the way it fell apart as it kind of went further up. I was like, this is so perfect for the play.
Yeah. Oh, good, good. Thank you. Yeah, Brian is an Brian who works a lot at the Arvada Center, but works all over as a scenic designer, and I know he runs props also at the Arvada Center. He's incredible to work with. He's really fun. He's incredibly capable. Like whatever, I used to be a sort of amateur scenic designer, and so I like thinking that way. But whatever I'm thinking of, he's thinking of it like 100 times better, and then he just makes it happen. And he's really delightful to work with. Yeah.
And so, what else are you working on this year? Do you have any upcoming projects, either as a director or a performer, that you can share at this
Yeah,
time?
I can't share right now. I'm talking about a couple things um with theater companies. I am working on the book. So Kateri and I have 5 seasons, 24 episodes of the Actors Mind podcast, which I'm very proud of, and we got a contract with Rutledge fall of 2023. And so we're about we're working chapter 7 of a 9 chapter book. And we're going to get that draft in September, October. And then that'll get published as part of a series on embodied cognition and theater and
Mm.
performance next year in 2026 with Rutledge. So I'm doing that, but I'm going to direct something in the fall at DU, and then I'm hoping to work professionally sometime in the second half of 25, beginning of 26. Yeah.
Mhm. What,
So
I know you probably have to be very selective about, those types of commitments. So, what kind of role, is it that really grabs you? Is there a
uh
way to define that at all?
yeah, that's it. Thank you for asking. I also feel very fortunate whenever I'm cast, but I do just with the full-time teaching job, I can't say yes to everything. I just worked on a reading of The Sound Inside written by Adam Rapp. I did it with Betsy. Mark Reagan directed, and the other actor was Nate Cushing. And it was just a week of rehearsals, and we were on book, and it was sort of partially staged. Curious Theater produced it with Diana Dresser and Micah Conway back in, I want to say 22, maybe winter of 22, I'm going to guess. And Saban Epstein directed it. It's this stunningly written. So I love stuff where the text, the language is really complex. It could be Shakespeare or it could be something contemporary. And Sound Inside is a great example with really sort of heightened, difficult to unpack language that can sort of entice the audience. I really, really love that. And The Sound Inside is a really excellent example of that. And then the other thing is, I'm obsessed with plays about teenage girls. Like John Proctor is the villain from a director perspective, obviously not an actor. Or, The Wolves is a very famous play by Sarah DeLapp, right? That kind of stuff where you're actually just focused on the teenage girl experience is something that excites me also. Yeah.
Great. Well, we
Yeah.
look forward to seeing you on stage
Oh,
next for
thank
sure.
you. Thanks for this opportunity. This has been fun.
Yeah. Yeah. Ann Penner, thank you so much for coming on the OnStage Colorado podcast. It was wonderful to talk with you. Yeah, we'll see you out there.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you so much. And we are going to take a quick break to hear from our sponsors. And when we return, it will be just Alex and I to share our top 10 Colorado headliners, as well as airing Alex's interview with Megan of Green Theater.
OnStage Colorado is supported by the Aurora Fox Arts Center, whose production of The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime runs March 21st through April 13th. The play earns 6 Tony Awards, including Best Play, and delves into the mind of a remarkable young man on a quest for the truth. Tickets at aurorafoxartscenter.org. Also supporting OnStage Colorado is Denver's Curious Theater, presenting Downstate March 13th through April 13th. The hard-hitting play shares the story of 4 men convicted of sex crimes who share a group home post-incarceration. Tickets at curioustheater.org. Support for OnStage Colorado also comes from the Boulder Ensemble Theater Company, whose production of The White Ship runs April 10th through May 4th at the Boulder Dairy Center. Straight from its critically acclaimed run off-Broadway, The White Ship is the true story of one man's journey from alcoholism to recovery in a play the New York Times described as laugh-out-loud funny and gasp-inducing self-inflicted tragedy. Tickets at betc.org. OnStage Colorado is brought to you by the Town Hall Arts Center, presenting Once, March 28th through April 27th. Featuring all the captivating music from the Oscar-winning movie musical of the same name, Once features a cast of multi-talented actors and musicians who will invite audiences into a magical world powered by creativity, passion, hope, and song. Tickets at townhallartscenter.org. OnStage Colorado is brought to you in part by the Arvada Center, presenting A Gentleman's Guide to Love and Murder running through May 11th. When charming and cunning Monty Navarro discovers he's in line for an earldom in the aristocratic Dicewith family, he speeds up the line of succession through any means necessary, all while juggling his mistress, his fiancée, his reputation, and an increasing body count that's raising suspicions of the law. Tickets at arvadacenter.org. OnStage Colorado is supported by Vintage Theater Productions, with Leap of Faith season tickets now on sale for Vintage's 25th anniversary season. Show titles will be announced on May 4th, and through April 15th, you can get 9 tickets to the 25th anniversary season for just $129. That's just $14.35 per ticket. Season ticket subscribers get lots of perks, including no fees and incredible flexibility in scheduling those 9 tickets across the season in the way that works best for you. Take the leap at vintagetheater.org. All right, we are back and ready to dig into this week's Colorado headliners. So these are shows that are coming up in the next week or two that we think you should know about in no particular order. So, Tony, what's your first headliner this week?
I'm kicking us off with a classic. Jester's Dinner Theater out in Longmont is staging Annie. So this is that musical tale based off of a comic strip about little orphan Annie who's adopted by Daddy Warbucks and gets to go live a better life tomorrow. So it's you know it. You probably, as soon as I said the title of the show, all of the songs probably immediately came into your brain. So for that, I perhaps apologize, but I also don't. It's a great show. And it's being done in that fun kind of dinner theater format up in Longmont all the way through June 15th. So you've got a ton of time to get up to Longmont and see this one. And I just think I wanted to shout this out because it's cool that Jester's Dinner Theater is still around and kicking. I mean, they've been flirting with closure for the past few years now, but every time they say they're going away, they just find a way to keep coming back and staging more theater.
Yep. Go Jesters. All right,
Absolutely.
my first headliner is also a dinner theater situation up at Candlelight in Johnstown. This is Bright Star. This is inspired by a true story. It's had a Tony-nominated score by Steve Martin and Edie Brickell. So it's a sweeping tale of love and redemption set in the American South in the 1920s and 40s. I've never seen this one. But I know Leela, our correspondent up in Fort Collins, is going to check this one out. So we'll have a review of that. Bright Star runs April 10th through June 8th. So also plenty of time to see that one.
My next headliner opens today, as of the time that you're listening to it. It's The Wiz, which is touring through the Denver Center April 8th through the 20th. This is the Tony Award-winning Best Musical that took the world by storm and is now returning home to stages across America in an all-new Broadway tour, which is the first in 40 years. So this is the groundbreaking twist on The Wizard of Oz that changed the face of Broadway. It has an iconic score packed with soul, gospel, rock, and 70s funk that tell the story of Dorothy with an all-black cast.
Yep. Yep. I think I may have mentioned this, but yeah, one of the first shows I ever saw on Broadway when I was a kid. So that was one I remember as being pretty great.
And you're going to be at the show, so will you tonight, right?
Tomorrow night, right? Tuesday? Yeah. As they're listening, yes, Tuesday night. Yep, I'll
Well,
be
then
there.
I will see you there, and I'm gonna come up to you, and I'm gonna demand that you compare notes to the original production versus this one that we see on tour.
Yeah, my memory, I can't remember what I had for dinner last night, so probably not. But anyway, it'll be fun. Yeah, I look forward to that. My next headliner is one that I think our correspondent Alice Caterlin is going to be at. Ballet Masterworks. This is Colorado Ballet at the Denver Center, April 11th through 20th. So this is kind of like a little smorgasbord of ballet. So it's their annual repertory production. So they have three masterpieces, they say. So one is George Balanchine's Serenade, Jiri Kilian's Petit Mot, which is French for orgasm. So I'm curious about that one. And then Twyla Tharp in the Upper Room. So if you want to get a nice dose of ballet, there's your chance.
Yeah, I'll be curious to see what a dancing orgasm looks like.
Yep.
My next pick is a one-woman show being done by andToni 2 Theater Company at the Roaming Gnome Theater in Aurora. It's called Collecting Myself and runs April 10th through the 19th. It features Paula Jane Friedland, who takes the audience on a heartfelt journey through original songs, personal stories, and poignant reflections as she navigates the universal quest for meaning and purpose. Through humor, vulnerability, and soulful melodies, she unpacks the highs and lows of her search for direction, asking, what does it really mean to find your purpose?
All right. Sounds great. My next headliner is a doubleheader of Little Shop of Horrors. So there are two productions of Little Shop opening on April 11th. So one is at the Denver Center. Previews begin April 11th, and then it runs through May 25th. And then it's also Steel City Theater Company in Pueblo is opening for a shorter run. It's April 11th through 27th. So as we've talked about, this is one of our faves. We can't wait to see it at the Denver Center. Yeah, just really looking forward to it.
If anyone who listens to the podcast somehow makes it out to see both versions, please write in. I want to hear. I want to hear the comparisons. Like Alex mentioned, love Little Shop. So just curious to see how it's done in all forms.
Yeah.
My next pick is down in the Springs. It's being done by Springs Ensemble Theater, April 10th through the 27th, and it's a pretty well-known dramatic piece. It's Doubt, a Parable. It's set at a Catholic school in the Bronx in 1964 and follows the conservative principal who becomes suspicious of Father Flynn, who's this charismatic priest, after Sister James, who's a young and naive teacher, notices unusual attention being given to Donald Muller, who is the school's first Black student. Without any concrete evidence, the principal embarks on a relentless pursuit to expose what she believes is misconduct. And the play really never answers any questions. So you're going to just have to go and make up your own mind, doubt and all.
Yeah, great play by John Patrick Shanley there. That's it. It's right up their alley. My next one is The White Chip. So this will be at Betsy the Boulder Ensemble Theater Company at the Dairy Center in Boulder, April 10th through May 4th. So this had a pretty successful run off Broadway. And I know Mark Reagan over there at Betsy had seen it in New York and was like, I've got to get this to Betsy. So the playwright is Sean Daniels. It's an autobiographical story about addiction and so, it's the kind of thing where, we're pretty familiar with addiction stories. So I'm definitely curious to see this one and see what's new and interesting about this take on it.
Yeah, I'll be curious to hear about your experience attending the show because I know you're checking this one out on Saturday.
Yep.
Also, in the Boulder area, I'm closing us out with a dance show for my final headliner. This is at the Dairy Arts Center, April 11th through the 13th. It's called Live, an evening of dance with Third Law. And this is the description. Newton's third law of motion is both the philosophical and physical foundation of third law dance/theater. Since its founding in 2001, the company has embodied the power of action and reaction in the conversation of movement. Live brings this idea to the stage, featuring the full company alongside 9 guest artists for a live performance with a cast of 19 dancers on the stage. So it's a lot of dancers in the dairy. And that is it for this week's headliners. Now we are going to throw it to Alex's interview with Megan of Green Theater to talk a little bit about how the theater industry should be responding to the ongoing climate crisis.
So, hey, I am here with Megan Holdeman with Green Theater Colorado. She is the founder and director of this effort to try and get theaters to not throw so much shit away or something like that. So, thanks for being on the podcast, Megan. It's great to see you.
Of course. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. So I want to just start from the beginning. What inspired the founding of Green Theater Colorado, and how's it evolved since you began, trying to mobilize the Colorado performing arts industry towards these more climate positive practices?
Yeah, as an audio engineer, I've worked all over town, and from the very beginning of my career, I've just been on my theaters about rechargeable batteries. Like disposable batteries have just always been a thing that bugged me, and I was always looking for alternatives and always trying to convince the theaters that I worked with to get rechargeable batteries. And I did a lot of environmental stuff in my personal life, so I started to get into zero waste and reducing my own personal waste in my life. And then when I got on tour, I went on tour with the First National of Bandstand, and living on a bus really made me I had to give up all of the environmental things that I was doing. And there were hardly any recycling facilities of any kind. And we were using rechargeable batteries, at least there's that.
Yeah.
But I didn't like that I'd had to put away so much of my environmental self. So I had really been thinking about how I might build environmentalism into my life a little more significantly. And I had been thinking about going back to school, and then the pandemic happened. So I was sent home from my tour and was going to be unemployed for the foreseeable future. And I started looking at grad programs. It was like, it's now or never, right?
Yeah.
So I found this actually through the Denver Zoo. There's a program called Project Dragonfly, and it's through Miami University, which is in Oxford, Ohio.
Right.
And it's a community engagement based conservation program. So a lot of the folks that join this program are conservationists, researchers, or teachers. But there's a handful of people that were artists, and really because the program is about how do you walk into a community and create change in that community, it really didn't matter what you did for a living. It was how can you actually facilitate that kind of change, get buy-in from the community, make the changes last. And as I kept thinking about who was my target audience and who was my community, I don't have a lot of physical community. I was just on tour. I'd never, lived in one place for long enough, but I was like, all I know are theater people. So it very quickly was like, well, obviously theater people should be my audience then. What does that mean? And so through projects in different classes, I started researching theater and sustainability. And that's when I discovered the Broadway Green Alliance, which is basically a similar organization, but in New York City. And they actually have chapters in Chicago, Atlanta, Minneapolis. And they're doing this make the theater industry greener. And so for a school project, I interviewed Molly Braverman, who is the director, very similar to what we're doing right now. I interviewed her for a school project. And as I was talking to her, I was like, oh, maybe I should start a chapter of Broadway Green Alliance in Colorado. So that's kind of where the idea was born. And then through the rest of my grad school projects, as sustainable theater became more and more the direction I was headed, and starting a chapter, and then that kind of just snowballed into it being an organization that I founded myself. And I did a production in 2021 for another school project, and we did it at Town Hall Arts Center. Got a bunch of performers in town and technicians in town to just put together a show that was themed on climate change and really envisioning a Green New Deal. So what does it look like when we succeed? How do we look forward and imagine a future that is sustainable? And then I've been working on this ever since.
So, what are some like examples of climate impacts that are unique to the performing arts industry that people might not even think about, especially live performance or theater?
Yeah, of course we throw away set pieces. That's a really major thing, that we build these whole universes and then we throw them out. Or even if we are trying not to throw them out, we're trying to donate them to somebody else, or we don't have the storage for it and things like that. Sorry, I'm a little nervous.
That's okay.
Let's see. Parking, patrons traveling to theaters is actually one of the higher emissions impacts of the performing arts industry, because we are attracting hundreds of people to our facilities on a daily basis. And a lot of these things are really hard because they're not actually things that the theater itself is controlling. Because
Right.
it's also heating and cooling these big cavernous buildings that maybe are not so good at putting the heat where we want the heat and putting the cooling where we want the cooling, because heat
Maybe were
rises
built
and
decades ago.
yeah, nobody's up there. Things like that are really the biggest impact things. But it's also because it's an industry that is so socially aware and wants to tell stories that are about challenges people are facing. And as far as social justice goes, climate change is disproportionately impacting communities of color and lower income communities, and they're facing a lot of impacts of climate change without having contributed very much to the problem. And so there's also ways in like storytelling that we can lift up those stories and highlight how important it is for climate action to be part of our social justice story.
Right. Yeah, I know. I mean, it's kind of tough to. I mean, the waste is that's something that you could actually address. Like you said, that not things like transportation are kind of outside the purview of what the
Right.
theater can impact, other than encouraging people to take the light rail if it's an option. But so, I mean, what have some of the approaches you found for engaging these organizations that might initially be resistant to changing the established practices, which is like just throw it out and move on?
A really good question, and that is actually a big part of why I've chosen this e-waste initiative to be our first initiative. I know there's a lot of resistance, and like sustainability is expensive and we can't afford that right now. And so I really wanted to think about a way that was going to get theaters to not be afraid to engage with Greener Theater Colorado. And so helping them get rid of waste that they already have, that is either just taking up space in their theater that they can't really use anymore, but they also can't put it in the trash for toxic waste reasons, or they can put it in the trash and it's like batteries, are technically can go in the trash and can go to the landfill, but it's still not the best option for them. And so by bringing on this no cost e-waste recycling, we're going to help get on theater's good sides and have people excited to engage with us. Because when I talk about the excitement, I'm a very passionate person, and I get really, really excited when I'm talking about Greener Theater Colorado and how we might impact our community through sustainable action in theater. Then that's what gets people excited about what I'm talking about. Instead of like, oh, we can't do that. Oh, we can't do that. There's a whole list of reasons why we can't do all these things. And so it feels like it's my job to say, okay, what might you be able to do? That's kind of that community engagement based. It's okay, what are the problems that we're facing and how can we deal with them in a way that is actually manageable? And e-waste seems like a really good way to get through that door. And then when we have a working relationship, then at least we can talk more about what other kinds of waste do we have? What other kinds of help do you need? What corners do you always have to cut for financial reasons that maybe Greener Theater Colorado can help figure out a way to overcome that barrier.
Yeah, and have you looked at someone like partnering with places like I know I happen to live in Douglas County. I know they've got like a paint and e-waste and thing where, you can I think it's $30 for a residence, where you can have them come pick up all your old spray paint and hard drives and things like that. So do you look at like kind of making those connections between theaters and some of the organizations that already exist for dealing with this waste?
Yeah, so I the couple of organizations that I've reached out to and I'm connecting with are Blue Star Recyclers and Sustainability, which is in Arvada, as the two places that we're going to drop off. And I have not. Are you asking specifically if I have like talked to theaters about partnering with e-waste recyclers near them so that they can get rid of their own waste
Or
more
just making
easily?
them aware that these places exist. They might not even know.
Yeah, that's one of the things that's also there, in the millions of ideas that are in my head. I'm thinking about how to educate as well through this e-waste program and talking about what kinds of things can be electronically recycled. And I think that teaching folks how to recycle it and where they might be able to recycle it is definitely one of the things that I think in content wise is a direction that we'll go. We've actually one of the things I have worked on and will be a next thing that we end up posting is a how to take care of your rechargeable batteries. So because rechargeable batteries have been part of my life for so long, and the thing that I've been shouting about for the longest, then I have a video for like, it's what kinds of batteries to get to make sure they're going to be reliable for shows and how to take care of them so that they last as long as possible and then how to get rid of them safely. And that'll be a video that goes out and we're going to send it to all the theaters and encourage even more participation in the e-waste program.
Okay, well that's great. Well, so you've been around for a couple of years now. Can you talk about some success stories? Any case studies that have worked out for you?
Yeah, so we don't have any case stories yet. So our fiscal sponsorship just came through in November. So we didn't have any money until we were able to start fundraising. But we did do the production, as I was saying, in 2021. It was called A Future We Create. And we had about 75 people attend the performance, and we had 21 volunteers working on the performance. And we did the whole thing for about $15 because everybody just kind of was really excited to do it. And that was a really amazing first step for the organization. And then we also did in April 2022 for Earth Day, we produced a music video it included footage from a lot of different theaters, the sustainable practices that are already in place, like using iPads for scripts and rechargeable batteries and doing like laminated sign-in sheets and refillable water bottles and all sorts of things like that. And that has 400 views at this point, and it also won Best Song in the AARPA Film Festival, which was really cool.
Okay.
And then we also did a community discussion. So we invited folks to a Zoom session, and we had discussion prompts, and we had breakout rooms. So we would just present a question and then break out and talk about it. And we had 25 participants in that, and all of those folks signed on to get more information about Greener Theater Colorado when we had more. But a lot of the last year or so has really been me figuring out how to build the foundation of the organization and how to actually raise money and launch programs and actually run them. So I've now got 5 volunteers, including myself, that will help participate in these e-waste pickups and start running these programs.
Okay. Yeah, it is, not just the, backstage, there's also a lot of front of house stuff. Like, I mean, starting to see some movement, like the Denver Center now is using these reusable cups or recyclable, I guess. And like you go to the Boulder Dairy Center and they've got these compostable cups and things like that. I mean, that can add up to a lot of stuff. I have to say, like, sometimes, I've been doing this kind of stuff for years. And I sometimes think to myself, like, God, I'm peeling the label off of this beer can to recycle it, you know? And then the guy next door to me is like doing none of that. He doesn't even do recycling, he just throws it all, whatever. And then industry is just, who cares? And, now you've got the Trump administration kind of running roughshod over the EPA and all this. I mean, it can be kind of discouraging. So, do you have any, like, I don't know, inspirational messages for theaters to make them, believe that that does make a difference?
Yeah, action is what makes me feel better. It's what gives me hope that, like, the one thing I can do is something, and I can't live with myself if I just sit back and don't do anything. And so I actively seek out success stories. And when you look at places like, there's not a whole ton of them in the United States, but if you look at like the National Theatre in the UK, that they have a very thorough environmental reporting section on their website, and you can see that they've reduced their front of house waste by 80%. So they're 80% to goal, which is 2035, and they're working on solar panels, and they've got reusable cups and all of these things, and you can see that it really is working. Like, our cup has taken over a lot of venues in Colorado. Our cup is the reusable cup company that you were just referring to, that is now at the Buell and the Ellie and Betcher, and it's also at Red Rocks, and it's at the Lincoln Center in Fort Collins. It's at the AEG venues, so it's like the Bluebird, the Ogden, the Gothic. They all have our
Yep.
cups. Arvada Center has our cups, and you're really starting to see things show up a little bit more, and theaters are starting to talk about it. Like, the Denver Center of the Performing Arts now has a value for sustainability, or Miners Alley has been using glass for their bar since 2006, and that's something that, like, theaters would never even consider doing that. And Miners Alley's been doing it since 2006, and they're like, actually, we don't have a lot of broken cups. We're not really concerned about the broken glass because it doesn't happen often enough for us to be concerned about it.
Yeah, well, they
And
just like pretty burly, like mason jars, and yeah, it's a great
yeah,
point. And plus, it's nicer to drink out of a glass than it
yes,
is
yeah,
plastic
it's
of any kind.
classy, right?
Yeah.
And with their new venue, they got LED fixtures, and they're working on solar panels, and the roof is big enough that if they get solar panels all over that roof, not only will it power Miners Alley, but it'll also power half the block. And when you focus on stories like that, it's easy to get excited about what we are doing and then want to do more things.
Hmm. Right. So if you're thinking about, you just got some funding, so you're kind of teeing up for some initiatives. What changes would you like to see in Colorado's performing arts industry in the next, few years regarding climate action and this kind of stuff?
Yeah, I would love to see more R cup, more of those reusable cups. The composting mess that we're in right now, particularly in Denver County, puts everyone in a really hard place as the like transition over to compostable cups, only to have them like not be compostable,
Yeah.
and who knows when or if they'll be compostable again. So I would really love for reusable cups to be something that we're looking into in a lot more places, and especially because it will help teach patrons that they that they need to put the cup back and not take the cup home with them, which is one of the biggest problems that we're
Really?
seeing. But there doesn't seem to be very much of a network. Whenever somebody's got a set piece or props or whatever it is that they don't want to throw away, that they want to get rid of, it seems to be up to the individual person who wants to get rid of it to figure out where it might go. And I would
Right.
really love for there to be a network of all of these theaters where we know exactly where to go look for things and where to offer things. And there are some community spaces, like obviously Colorado Theater Guild's Facebook group is really great, but also people are working on are spending less time on Facebook. And so a place where we can actually go to look for those things, and there we have some hopes about shared resources, as far as like having a warehouse that theaters can kind of buy a membership in, and then theaters who don't have storage at all can either store things in there, or they have access to a warehouse where they can then rent set pieces. And maybe that also leads to, we're making set pieces in such a way that we've built the structure to be used over and over and over again, and just the facing changes, and maybe we can reassemble it like a puzzle that we can rearrange for all these different shows without having to build new stuff every time. And really, that's a matter of storage. It's people don't not a lot of theaters have the space or the time to be hauling things to a warehouse for storage or to be keeping them on site. And so really having that network and that ability to share resources amongst all sizes of theaters. I mean, I would love to see it from DCPA down to community theaters, down to high schools and college theaters. Like, we could really just all be making beautiful art that's reused
Right.
and see
Yeah.
how much less waste we produce when we do it that way.
I mean, the idea of having like this warehouse where you could have like props and costumes and set pieces is a beautiful idea. You know, I know when I was talking to Len Matteo at Miners Alley, they've got this huge space, and he was talking about, you know, making some of that room available for something like that. But you know, it really does take you know, it takes a lot of coordination, you know, and you know, you've got to have some kind of an inventory you know, website or something like that. So you know, there's a lot of pieces to it, but that's great that you're thinking along those lines. But so when you think about some of these sustainable practices, they might add costs or time, and especially for small theaters. I mean, what do you say to them when they're like, I don't know, I can't afford this R cut program or whatever? What are some of the smaller things they can do?
Smaller things they can do. Um, what One of the things that I always start with is, do you have recycling on site, and is it working? Because as you said, there's a lot of contamination, there's a lot of range of apathy and care for where things go in the bins. So the smaller theaters, I tend to say, look at what you have and how you might reduce the waste that you do have. Like, reducing your contamination rate of your recycling is one place to start. The nice thing about smaller theaters is that because they have smaller budgets, there's a lot of cost saving things that are also environmentally friendly, like reusing and repurposing and
Right.
minimizing the size. And so I also try to emphasize, like, you are actually doing a lot more than you think you are, because you're using less of this stuff in the first place. And then that is another goal of Greener Theater Colorado, is I want to make sure that those smaller places can have access to things that they wouldn't have access to otherwise.
So, with that national organization and with Greener Theater Colorado, do you have any kind of like, I don't know, good housekeeping seal of approval or something that says we're a green theater or something like that you can give theaters?
Actually, so in the UK, there is a green certification. There's an organization called Julie's Bicycle, and I would love to start something like that. There isn't there. Broadway Green Alliance has a green captain program, so anyone from any theater, university level, professional, community, whatever, can sign up to be a green captain with them, and then they go on a list on the Broadway Green Alliance website, and then you have access to all of these resources and this community of folks that are doing things. And so you can ask questions and get resources that maybe you don't have to do all the research on your own, if you know what I mean.
Right.
And so anybody can sign. If there are any advocates out there, or just people who work at a theater in some capacity and want to do more, you can at least like have a green captain, and then there's somebody in the room who's always thinking about sustainability, because that can be one of the tricks. Is if there's not somebody thinking about that angle on a regular basis, then it's often it becomes an afterthought, right? So when we think about sustainability from the beginning of the process, how do we reduce the amount of waste we make in the first place, rather than just how do we handle the waste that we have created? Having a sustainability person in the room from the beginning, having a green captain, can go a long way. And so there's programs like that exist, and we've talked about having a little closer to home hub of green captains, so they would have access to, Broadway Green Alliance resources, but then also just those of us that are with Greener Theater Colorado in the community, so you don't have to be it's so far removed from the Broadway Green Alliance. And I would love for there to be stamp. One of the things about the e-waste program, I will be doing, I'll be weighing the waste that we're collecting from each theater by theater, and then I want to provide like social media workbook for those theaters so that they can post about how much waste they're diverting. Like we're partnered with Greener Theater Colorado, and we've diverted this much e-waste, in the last 6 months or in the last year, so that way it'll at least get seen more often, and hopefully will eventually lead to some sort of certification.
Yeah. Plus, I mean, that messaging from theaters is really important. The more people hear that, like, oh, wow, I can, have this R cup, or, I don't have to throw away all this stuff, or it's nice to know that the theater is doing something along those lines. So, and of course, the performing arts industry has an expertise in telling people stuff, So maybe, along with the information about the Ute tribe that used to live there, maybe I can say, hey, make sure you put your shit in the right bin on the way out.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah, and there's some theaters where it's like, like I can think of like Town Hall Arts Center, for example. It's like they have the ushers. It's really nice. They have like bags for people leaving the theater at the end of the show, but they're not just one bag. It's like,
Yeah.
no, you need to have a recycling bag. So I'll always hang on to my can or whatever it is and go downstairs, and it's just like little things like that. It's like it's gotta happen
Yep.
all over, or it doesn't happen at all. So,
I actually just saw Mean Girls at the Buell, and I saw someone like almost try to walk out with a cup, and the usher was like, wait, and we need you to put the cup back. And to see that kind of management of our cup, to be able to see that in like, hey, making sure that you're putting it in the right bin would be just really cool to see.
Yeah. All right. Well, Megan Holdeman with Greener Theater Colorado, I wish you the very best. I will certainly do my part as best I can, and I hope everybody listening to the OnStage Colorado podcast is thinking along those lines. And it's we'll have to catch up with you and in I don't know, another year or so, and see how some of your initiatives have been going. So thanks for coming on and telling us about all this important.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah.
That was a great chat with Megan. I wonder how many theaters that she can inspire to really make that change.
Yeah. It's one of those things, and this goes for recycling in general. And of course, recycling is not going to get us out of the climate crisis, but every little bit helps. And, it's a matter of, you've got to make it easier for people, because if it's a hassle, people will just be like, fuck it, they'll just throw it in the trash, And so it's great to have people like Megan and her organization out there trying to, make that change.
So what else is new or coming soon on the site, Alex, that people can check out?
Yeah, so we've got new reviews from Baskerville and Gentleman's Guide to Love and Murder, and I'll have a review of Perfect Arrangement from Firehouse, The Wiz at DCPA, the aforementioned Doubt at Springs Ensemble Theater Company. Like I said, I think Alice is doing a review of Ballet Masterworks, and then they'll be at the White Ship this weekend. So lots of new stuff will be on the site here pretty soon.
Yeah, and then next week on the podcast, we are going to have another special guest host. We are being joined by Betty Hart to talk a little bit about the Colorado Theater Guild, local theater, the upcoming local lab, and a bunch of other news items that we'll round up for that conversation. So if you've got any questions that you'd like us to ask Betty, or feedback on the show, feel free to shoot us an email at info@onstagecolorado.com.
Yeah, so this will be Betty's. I think she is probably in the lead in terms of repeat people on the pod. It might be her third or fourth appearance. So if she does 5, we'll have to get her one of those like gold blazers or that they have at Saturday Night Live, right?
That's right, the 5-timer club.
All right. Well, if you want to stay up to date what's going on in theater, comedy venues across the state, subscribe to our OnStage Colorado Theater Blast, which comes out every Thursday. Pretty much catch you up to date.
Yeah, and if you like what we are doing here on the podcast, please consider leaving a review wherever you're listening now, and tell the other theater lovers in your life about us.
All right, that's it for this week. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks so much to Ann Penner for coming on. It was great to have her on the show. I'm Alex Miller.
And I'm Tony Tresca, and we will see you at the show.